Please welcome producer Stephen Cornwell. And David's son. Thanks for being here, Stephen,
Well,
especially on your dad's birthday.
No. Thank you all for being here very much.
I've always watched the documentary twice. How did you reconcile as being the son of John le Carré and David Cornwell, the fact that he was John le Carré and he was? Did you knew it was two? How did you see it? Two people
As a movie, or was
no,
him
no,
as
no.
a person?
In everyday.
Well, I mean, I think the movie in many ways is a good portrait of the combination of the two. And, you know, I think in everyday life, he was very much Dad or David. Mm-hmm. I think certainly in early life, you know, before the internet and all, a pen name was very separating, so that the character of John le Carré was very much a kind of alter ego that lived outside the house in some ways. But at the same time, you know, he was a writer who worked all the time, so the presence of his work and his process was part of everyday life.
Mm-hmm. In the film, your grandfather is such a huge influence on your dad. If it hadn't been for him and his life, your dad wouldn't have been who he is ultimately. How did you meet your grandfather, and how did that affect you, your relationship?
I mean, I think our granddad, he was around in our early childhood. Before I remember him coming to Germany. Actually, he had got, we were living in Germany when my dad was a spy there. Ronnie came, he had a concession for amphibious vehicles. And I just remember that as an early kind of primal memory, that it was so exciting, this concept that he brought this vehicle, and we were hoping he'd take it out on the river, and but he never did. And then as my dad got better known, I realized in retrospect Ronnie was sort of banned from our life as he was leveraging off our dad in terms of his own criminal pursuits. And then once we were teenagers, he was allowed to re-enter in a kind of controlled way, and my brother and I would go and have lunches with him at weekends, and but we didn't really know what to say to each other, but he was allowed back in, and then he died, you know, when I was in my late teens.
And but were you aware of the?
We were aware that he was very concealed from our life, so he was absent. And then as we got older, he would creep into our dad's stories, and he became present as a sort of, as he became increasingly part of a narrative that our dad owned. I mean, something that's interesting about, you know, and as you can see in the movie, that there was always a fusion of fact and fiction with our dad, and he built that very openly into his stories, and that divide between where one world began and the other ended was always slightly marginal. So he'd tell stories about Ronnie that, you know, we got very used to and maybe perhaps felt were inflated. But what's interesting, you know, that's come to light now and even doing this movie is that Ronnie was actually a much worse man and a much more serious criminal than he told in his stories. That actually that childhood was much darker. And Ronnie was, you know, hung out with the Cray brothers and other serious criminals. And $1 million, you know, bankruptcy in 1950 was that. For instance, that was a major. Yeah, that's $20-30 million today.
But it's fascinating how, because of all of that, it like.
Well, I think, you know, a con man creates stories, right? I mean, a con man weaves his world around his fantasies, or the selling of fantasies as fact. And, you know, I think that gene translates to espionage very naturally, where also you are weaving fiction into reality in terms of the operations you're running or part of, the alternate personas you have, which also then translates very, you know, much into a novelist, right? That you create stories. So in a way, for all his criminality, I think you can see that Ronnie was a storyteller, and so was his son in different ways.
Yeah. Was your dad aware that this would be his swan song? Was that his impetus to do the documentary?
I mean, there were lots of it. I mean, there was a converging set of impetuses. Errol had approached us just coincidentally, a year or so before we started out with the movie, to say, did we think our dad might be interested? We'd met Errol through mutual friends. And then obviously, my brother and I had been working with our dad for the last 10, 15 years on various movies and TV projects. And somehow, and that had built up a lot of confidence with him. And our dad was interested in a definitive sort of what he saw as a final conversation on camera, not because he thought he would die. I think he thought he was going to live a good while yet, but because he didn't want to have any more conversations on camera, he just wanted to, or do any more interviews. He wanted a sort of he felt ready for a final conversation. And the idea of Errol, whose work he'd much admired, appealed to him on that basis.
Seen Fog of War.
Seen Fog of War, he'd seen many of his movies, and really admired what Errol's work. And so I think he felt that there was a very natural symbiosis. And now, we didn't set out to make a movie crudely about a dead man. We set out to make a movie about our dad, and then obviously the nature of that film changed once, our post-interview and post-COVID, when our father passed away, and it became something different in a sense, but and retrospectively, there's a lot of magic to that convergence, and it was extraordinary that we made that film.
Your dad, what kind of preparation did he do before Errol showed up to interview?
The secret of our dad, and if you ever saw any other public appearances of his, they were always very well, he felt very publicly comfortable, but the secret was he was very, very prepared for everything he did. He worked constantly, furiously hard, and any public appearance, he really gave it attention. He really respected his audience, his readership. He felt very, loyal to good performance in a way. And so once he knew he was going to work with Errol, yes, he read everything Errol had written. He watched most of his movies, and he was ready. He didn't put any parameters on the conversation, and nor did we, and Errol would never countenance that anyway. It didn't occur to any of us, but he was ready for it to go anywhere, and on a certain level, he was ready to kind of protect himself on certain levels.
Mm-hmm. Did he feel that Errol was going to unmask him, or he just?
I think he didn't know where Errol was going to go. And I think it's a testament to Errol that he also got our dad to relax beyond that. That there are things in this conversation, and they talked for 4 or 5 days. We have close to 20 hours of interview. But Errol got our dad to talk about things. There are things in the movie, and every time I watch it, there are things that surprise me, or I haven't heard him talk publicly that much. He never talks about his mother, for instance. I never heard him really talk in the way he does about her there. He never really talked about his creativity with any level of comfort. He was very modest about it.
You were producing the film, and you and your brother, and you were witnessing this happening. Errol's work and the themes that he deals with in his work are some of the themes that your dad has dealt in his books. Did you feel when you were watching the interviewing that there's the meetings of two great minds?
There was a definite, and Errol, there was a meeting of two great minds. Errol very much keeps his distance during his interview process. He doesn't like a lot of pre-discussion. They had met, they knew, they had polite conversation, and they'd had a couple of meals together. But Errol saves the conversation for the camera, and then after that, they sort of continued that. And yeah, it was like then they, were in this big country house on the edge of London. There was sort of two camps, and they met on camera. And it definitely felt like the meeting of two minds. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. I think the movie is very revealing about Errol, too.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about them, I think, is that, our dad, in the context of fiction, found his stories, drew his stories from the chaos of the real world. I think watching Errol, what's interesting, and this is the first documentary he made, is that he finds story in process. He doesn't really know the story until he goes on that journey. Mm-hmm. Whereas our dad definitely likes to apply story to the world he sees around him. But they're both storytellers.
I'm glad you brought that up because, the structure of Errol's film it's all over the place in a good way. And how did your dad, my question is, the interviews, were they linear?
No. Errol's very, I don't know if you've ever met or Errol or interviewed Errol, but Errol's not a linear person. and I think part of the beauty of the way he works and the way he exposes himself, which I think is the secret to a lot of what Errol does, is that he doesn't quite know where he's going, right? I mean, as a deliberate, he sort of senses where he's going, but he also, as a documentarian, is going to find that path in the doing of it, which is very different than, say, than a fictional writer who tends to, find the path, through characters, but also is applying a narrative to that world.
And walk us through how many interviews, how many days?
So I think we did, of interview, I think we did 4 or 5 days back to back. For 6 or 7 hours a day, so it was a real marathon. And it was not an interview that, in any normal kind of interview process, in that Errol uses multiple cameras. It's like a big movie shoot, so it has a whole scale to it. And then obviously he's got his Interrotron system, so that he's not even in the same room either, which makes it a very kind of intense. It's a strangely massive process that produces a very intimate result.
And you say there was a lot of people total. How many people were
on that set? It felt like a movie set. So it felt like our other productions. There were probably 150 people around.
And over 100 people, and you were there with your brother, and David and his. Your mom as well.
Our stepmom was there for some of the time, not all the time, because Dad wanted some. He goes into quite a kind of private space, or went into a private space. He was very concentrated, but yes, we were in his sort of. It was in his kind of green room, or his side of the ring was us, my brother and I. Yeah.
And I asked you this question outside, but I'll ask it again, is the fact that I was fascinated with the mirrors.
Yes.
That it turns the whole background into this very oblique world. Those were there.
Yes, Errol had, and there again, you are in a journey into Errol's mind as much as our dad's mind, and Errol had things he wanted to do that I think were largely intuitive. But the mirrors are practical mirrors, so we constructed a lot of mirrors.
And your dad wasn't like asking what's going on here?
No, I think our dad really allowed himself just to experience the process and engage in it in a very complete way. And and as you see from, one thing which is really fascinating about the movie, watching it, is we didn't have to do any editing of our dad's sentence construction or anything. He was really on, right? So that often with movies in general, you're cleaning up dialogue all the time, and you're fixing people's stutters and pauses and R's. And it was, that he was very tuned in and 100% there to do that.
He's such an enigmatic character, and I mentioned to you, I've seen the documentary twice, and I feel I know a lot about him, but I still feel like I don't know a lot of things about him. You, as his son and producer of the film, do you feel the same way, that like you know your dad, but you still?
I think the movie is a very you know, it's like a portrait, right? It's a very accurate portrait by an artist one artist of another artist. But you know, there could be a lot of portraits of our dad, like there could be a lot of portraits that a lot of different artists would do of a single figure. So I think there's a lot of truth in the movie. I think what's fascinating about my dad, or our dad, is that he was a master of controlling the narrative. Mm-hmm. And there was always the question, and it's in the Pigeon Tunnel book, and there was, you know, is he revealing to conceal, or is he revealing to reveal? and you know, and often talking about his dad, for instance, is a way of not talking about himself.
And that's the beauty of the film, that he's such a controlling figure, and now
Mm-hmm.
he's faced with Errol, who is
yes,
controlling himself, but in a very unstructured way.
Yeah. And I don't think Errol's, I mean, I think, you know, from my dad's perspective, I think he would be instinctively feeling that Errol was looking for some sort of singular point, or what, you know, he would be asking the whole way through, what is Errol looking for? And I think, obviously, the secret of Errol is he doesn't quite know what he's looking for, right? He's the journey itself. So on that level, again, they were very well matched. Do I think? I mean, I don't think the movie in any sense is a competition, or is that I think they both were genuinely having a conversation. I would say my feeling in the end is that my dad probably controlled that conversation a bit more than, you know, he basically delivered. He would be comfortable with what he delivered, I think. He'd be surprised by some of it. But again, as you say, that balance with him of revealing to conceal was very much part of his nature.
And sadly, we lost them. So he did not see the end product, nor what happened afterwards. What do you think he will make of the final product?
You know, I think, well, yeah, one of the projects we did with my dad, you know, always fascinatingly interesting and complicated process, and it was I won't name the project, but it was, he was in conflict with the process in various ways, or was very nervous of the project as it moved forward, and I was sitting at the premiere of it at the London Film Festival with him, and we were watching it, and then I felt something slipping into my pocket, and when I got home, I reached into my pocket, and it was a little note from my dad, and he said, "I hate to admit it, but it's terribly good." and I have a feeling he would probably say the same of this movie, and of himself, and I think he would say the same of Errol.
One of the stunning things about the film is all the recreations.
Yes.
It's like a big budget film. I mean, they're not just your average documentary recreations.
No, and again, that's very Errol. We shot all that in Hungary. And another small nice fact is that the little kids, or the little kid, but it's actually kids, in the movie. That's my grandsons. And therefore, David's great-grandsons, we have twin grandsons, and they play him as the 5-year-olds there.
Mm-hmm. And did your dad understand from the beginning that there was going to be?
He understood, and that was always the intention to be that there would be it would be from the Pigeon Tunnel. The intention right at the beginning was to have very little interview at all, and mainly lean into dramatization, weave the dramatization through the interview. But the interview became so strong that it inflected the other way. But always the intention was to dramatize, to have this concept of being in one form or another adapted from the book.
But you were involved with those?
Yeah. I wasn't actually on set. My brother was on set for those.
Mm-hmm. The line between fiction and truth, it's always been in your dad's storyline.
Yes.
And Errol also dive into that idea. Do you think that there was the understanding on in your dad's world that during this documentary there was going to be that blurring of?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, and he absolutely, and he was fascinated by that blurring, and he was very aware himself that that division, as he said, that he can't. In the movie, he says that he can't really define where truth ends and and fiction begins. You know, when he had a biography, there was a biography being written about him a few years ago, and he sat down with the biographer, and the biographer told me that he said to the biographer, "You can ask me any question you want, I'll answer completely truthfully, and you're not to believe a word I say."
The Pigeon Tunnel allegory is so powerful and open to interpretation. What do you think, for you, the Pigeon Tunnel?
Well, I think that obviously the interpretations that Errol applies in the movie in terms of the sort of cyclical nature of the sort of futility of life, or the cycle of that, you know, that we're all doomed to repeat historically and individually. I actually think there's something else in the Pigeon Tunnel, which is why my dad used it again and again.
Which is the creative process?
Which is the creative process for him, that I think it's easy to underestimate, as, you know, the effort and the isolation and the kind of trauma of the artistic process itself. And for a novelist, the 2-3 years it took him to write a book and what he put into that, I think that Pigeon Tunnel for him was the cyclical nature of his own creative process, that he was going down that tunnel towards the light. He'd come out and the book would be shot at or liked, but it would be complete, and then he'd go back and take a pause and then go back into that tunnel. So for him, I think the reason it just never left him as a metaphor and was genuinely the title on most of his books for a while, is that he just felt himself going back into that tunnel, and that was scary to him as well as exciting.
Yeah. And what do you think, I mean, since you produced a film, what do you want the legacy of this film to be?
For me, I mean, I think, you know, and I've watched it now with different audiences, and I find myself watching the movie, which actually is unusual, as you know, after a while when you're going to film festivals and stuff. But I'm very interested in how audiences
When you watched
react.
it, he watched it with you guys.
I did, and I love to feel how, and it's, because I also see different things in the movie. The legacies that I hope beyond, and everybody will interpret and pull their own feelings out of it, you know, is that he really was an artist in a very true sense, and he was very modest about that and conflicted about that in life. I hope that people see his humor. I hope that they see that despite the sort of nihilism of his work in some ways, or his declared nihilism, that he was actually, that he was very humanist, that he actually really believed in the individual, that if he saw any light, it was really in the strength of individualism, in the voice of people. And he believed passionately in storytelling and fiction as a way to kind of, in a way, navigate the world and find truth. And that he had fun, actually, too, that there was a mischief to him that he enjoyed a lot. And that also, you know, as much as the movie and Errol focus on the themes of betrayal, I remember driving away from one of the interviews with Dad, and he just said, "Oh, Errol keeps asking about betrayal. He keeps asking about betrayal, and it's easy." And he said, "It's so easy to forget that there is no betrayal without love." And I think, you know, a lot of my dad's writing was actually in different ways love stories, and that's easy to, you know, I'd hope that was a legacy too.
Well, happy birthday to your dad.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you so much.
Spread the word on the film, everybody.